Hi everybody, this is a look at the Nikon Df, which was produced in this country, the UK, in November 2013. So it's been available now for 2 years, and this is it in the original Nikon case, which is a CFDC6. It's got a nice Nikon emblem. It fastens via these press studs. And this on the bottom isn't a tripod socket, by the way. You can't remove it with the tripod. It secures the camera to the case at the bottom. I just put a felt disc on it because it's metal, so it would scratch wood surfaces, etc. I just wanted to show you the size compared to a Nikon professional film camera. This is the Nikon F3 in its case. You can see it's similar styling actually. The DF is obviously bigger, but the DF is still the smallest full frame digital SLR that you can purchase. So we're looking at the case, and I'll go through some specifications, controls, etc. I'm not going to go through all the menus on the LCD. There's many videos on YouTube that cover that. So I'm going to remove the case fully. Just remove this stud at the bottom. It slips out the case. Now, I generally do use it 100% of the time in the case, and it does actually give me that bit more grip here, and because that is a qualm with some people about this camera. But in my opinion, it's ideal. It's perfectly shaped and formed, and controls are excellent. And I think what a lot of people forget, in the old days with the film cameras, which either had a small grip like this or didn't have a grip at all, we used to hold the cameras quite differently. And nowadays people always hold the cameras with the right hand and hold the grip, so obviously this can feel a bit awkward, especially if you've got a heavy lens on. But in the olden days, and this is how I prefer to hold the DF now, you put the left hand under the body and on the lens, because obviously you used to do a lot of manual focusing with this thumb and forefinger. So you're supporting all the weight in that hand, and then this camera feels perfectly balanced. So I'm just going to mention some of the technical specifications, which I'm going to read from the Nikon manual, because I can't remember them all, I'm afraid. Its effective pixels is 16.2 megapixel. The image sensor is a 36 by 23.9mm CMOS sensor, which does have a low pass filter in front of it, I believe. Doesn't mention it here actually, but I'm sure it does have. Image size is 36 by 24 image area on FX. It does actually support DX. If you fit a DX lens, it will adjust for that, and then the DX image area is 24 by 16. File formats it supports are NEF or RAW, TIFF, JPEG, and a combination of those. Viewfinder is an eye-level pentaprism single lens reflex viewfinder, and in FX mode it gives you 100% viewfinder coverage, frame coverage. In DX mode actually it gives you only 97% the frame coverage. Magnification of the viewfinder is 0.7. It's got diopter adjustment. The focusing screen is a fixed screen. I have heard of people changing them, so it is possible to change them, but it's not something you can't buy a focusing screen from Nikon and in a kit fit it yourself. But I have heard of people changing them. But the focusing screen that's in it is a Type B Bright View Clear Matte Mark 8 screen with the AF area brackets. Framing grid can be displayed. Lens compatibility is very varied on this camera, and I think that's the beauty of it. I would say, in fact, it's the only digital camera that supports Nikon pre-AI lenses. It supports basically every other type of lens. I'm sure there's some types that won't work with it. One is the autofocus lenses for the Nikon F3AF, which won't autofocus with it. Shutter is electronically controlled vertical travel focal plane shutter. Shutter speeds are manually selectable from 1/4000th of a second to 4 seconds. The electrically controlled, as I say, and in the 1/3 step mode or in the program modes, then the shutter is variable in third steps from 1/4000th of a second to 30 seconds. The flash sync X mode on the shutter dial is 1/200th of a second, but you can actually synchronize flashes with it from 1/250th of a second or slower. Anything else interesting on here? Frame advance rate, maximum is 5.5 frames a second. You've got different drive modes, of course. Metering is a through the lens exposure metering using a 2016 pixel RGB sensor. You can use matrix, center weighted or spot metering. You've got exposure modes, programmed, shutter priority, aperture priority and manual. Exposure compensation is possible, bracketing, flash bracketing, white balance bracketing, got an exposure lock. The ISO sensitivity is manually selected, can be selected from ISO 100 to 12,800 in steps of a third AV. It does actually go down to an L1, a low 1 mode, which in theory is ISO 50. Autofocus, it uses a Nikon Multicam 4800 autofocus sensor module with through the lens phase detection. It's got 39 focus points, which include 9 cross-type sensors. Detection range is from -1 to +19 EV. That's at ISO 100. Autofocus, you've got single servo or continuous servo, or you can manually focus. You can select different AF area modes. You've got focus lock, flash control through the lens, which is ITTL flash control, using the 2016 pixel RGB sensor, which is available with the SB 910, 900, 800, 700, 600, 400 or 300. You get balanced fill flash, matrix, center weighted metering or standard ITTL flash. You've got flash compensation, got a standard accessory shoe. You've got advanced wireless lighting supported with the various flashes. Got a sync terminal. Things interesting. Monitor on the back is a 3.2 inch 921K dot BGA. I think that's interesting. It's got high-speed USB. Got different languages. Battery is a 1 rechargeable Leon ENEL14A battery. Got tripod socket, and its dimensions are 143.5 by 110 by 66.5. That's in millimeters. 5.6, 4.3 by 2.6 inches. Weight, and this is with battery and memory card but no lens, is 765 grams or 1 pound 11 ounce. And just to show you comparison with the F3, take the case of the F3. And you'll see they've styled it on, I would say they've styled the DF on various cameras actually, not particularly one. The Pentaprism is like a FE FM range camera. You can see the grip is similar to the F3, the grip style, because of no other Nikon film cameras has that type of grip. You can see it's got, if you look at it, the DF, it looks very similar to an old film camera when you look at it this way. We can see all the dials on it for the exposure compensation and the shutter speed. And the depth of field preview and that, and it's got a flash sync PC socket in a similar position as well. So when you turn to the back, of course, on a film camera, you see basically a plain back with a film holder, whereas on the DF you have obviously a LCD and all the buttons and controls for a digital camera. Now, one thing you can notice as well, looking at the back of here, although the DF has 100% viewfinder coverage, if you look at the size of the viewfinder on the F3 compared to the DF, you can see the DF is quite a bit smaller, and you do notice that actually. The focusing is you can focus quite well with manual lenses on the DF. I don't find it a problem, but having said that, it's easier to manually focus with something like the F3 or other professional Nikon film cameras. So, the build of the DF, it's very well constructed. It's got a magnesium alloy chassis. It's got on the front, back and top plate. It's obviously covered by the plastic and polycarbonate, etc. But because it's got that magnesium body, you'll basically be able to drop it, and I'm sure it'll carry on working, but obviously you'll damage the outer material. It has all metal dials. All these dials are metal, not plastic. Got a lovely feel to them, very well made, and it is completely weather sealed as well. So if you've got a lens that's got a weather sealing, you can basically use it outdoors in all weather. Something I use on the straps are these strap lug protectors, little leather tabs, which you can purchase, and obviously if you're using a strap all the time, it protects your rubbing, which we can get a lot of paint wear on these edges if you don't use those protectors. So I'm just going to run over now the controls, and then I'm going to run into some features of it and what I think of it. Hope this video isn't too long. So starting on the top, if you look on the right hand side, you've got the exposure mode selection, which is M for manual, then you've got A aperture priority, S shutter priority, and P fully program mode. Got a little button here which switches on the light for the display, because that's a top LCD display, where you basically just see the shutter speed, aperture and number of frames remaining. Here you've got the shutter release button, which has a lock off on switch, which you just move like that, and it does have a nicely got a threaded centre, which a lot of the film cameras had for fitting a cable release. Shutter speed dial, so it's got a lovely feel, this nice raised high, and it's selectable manually from 4 to 1/4 thousandths of a second. You've also got your other modes. You've got a B, which is your bulb mode, T for time mode, which works differently to a film camera. On a film camera, in T, you press the shutter, and then the shutter will remain open until you move the dial to another setting. On this digital camera, and I'm sure it works the same on other digital cameras, in T mode you press the shutter, press the button to open the shutter, and then when you're ready you press it again to close the shutter. You've got an X for flash sync speed, which as I said is 1/200th of a second, and then you've got your 1/3 step, because obviously all these shutter speed settings are in 4 steps. So if you select 1/3 step, you then control, in the correct exposure mode of course, the shutter speed on the command dial on the back. On the top you've got the flash accessory shoe. This is a standard accessory shoe. And on the right here, got a nice little stamp on the top, made in Japan, which is nice. You've got the, on the top dial, exposure compensation dial, which you press in the button and you can adjust that from +3 to -3 exposure compensation in 3rd steps, and you have to hold the button in every time to select that. And people say this is fiddly, but if you look at the way they worked on the old film cameras, it is as fiddly, if not more fiddly. On this one you have to press in the button and rotate the dial around the rewind crank, so it's no more difficult, for me anyway, than using a film camera. ISO dial is underneath that, and that is selectable all the way from L1 up to H4, which are expanded modes, but obviously you don't get, at those ISO settings you don't get a very good quality at all. I tend to use it on L1 because in most modes anyway it will only select, in auto ISO mode I should say, it will only select from 100 to 12800, or obviously in auto ISO you can set a maximum ISO setting. But if I want to use a 50 ISO, maybe I need to cut out just that bit more light, then I leave it set on L1, then I turn the auto ISO setting off so it's on manual, and I'll get a 50 ISO rating. Just now looking at the front, you've got the Nikon name, DF, you've got the strap lug, you've got the front command dial, and on most, well, all Nikon digital cameras, that is normally a dial similar to the back rear one, which is a dial that moves that way, which will be on the grip, but obviously because it's got much smaller grip, the dial has been placed flat against the body, and you move it forwards and backwards with the index finger. That's the way I would use it, and I don't find that a problem actually, because it seems to work fine for me, and it seems more natural as well. If you select the aperture with this dial, which you can, it works the same as selecting the aperture on a lens like this, say for example. So if I want a wider aperture, I move this ring anti-clockwise, and that's the same you would do with this dial. You'd push it to get a wider aperture, and vice versa of course. If you want a narrower aperture, then you would pull the dial towards you. So it's quite naturally working, so I don't find a problem with that. You've got 2 buttons here. You've got a depth of field preview button, that's what it's programmed at as default, and I don't find a problem why I need to change that. You've got a function button which you can set up for various functions. I'll tell you what I've set that up for in a while. You've got the lens release button, of course, little symbol saying it's an FX. You've got the autofocus settings, so you can set it by flicking this switch to autofocus or manual focusing. And you've also got a button in the centre of that. When you hold that in, you can move the front or rear dials to select different options on the focusing, i.e. the focusing mode and whether it's single or continuous focusing. You've also got a bracketing button here for bracketing the exposures, and it's something I don't use at all, and unfortunately you can't reprogram it, which I find a shame because it's in an ideal position for quickly making a different setting. but it cannot be reprogrammed. I think that's a shame. Looking on the back, say I'm not going to go into detail about a lot of the buttons. They're covered in a lot of other videos on all different Nikon digital cameras, which basically work the same. But just briefly, you've got your standard digital buttons on the back. You've got a AF on button, or focus on button, which I use for focusing rather than the shutter release, and that is generally on the higher end Nikon digital cameras. So basically you can press that button in and then it focuses. You've got the auto exposure lock, you've got your various controls for your metering, you've got a live view button, which I'll show you, because the live view does work nice on this. As I say, I used to have a D700 prior to this, but the live view is a lot more responsive on this camera. It doesn't focus as well in live view mode. Let me point out if it uses a different type of focusing. But the live view is very quick to update, which I find nice. You've got an info button giving you info for all your settings, etc., and making changes. You've got all these different buttons on the side here. Going to the left hand side, these covers, you've got a USB connection to a PC, etc., for uploading your images. You've got an HDMI socket for connecting to a monitor or display, and you've got a connection here. This is for connecting a remote release socket option, or even a GPS module. On the bottom you've got a tripod socket, standard, and you've got a nice battery memory release door, which I like. People say they fall off, but I don't have a problem with it at all, and it works like one of the old Nikon F releases, which you flick up this little catch and then turn it to open, and it nicely flicks open. You've got the battery here, which will give you on average around it's about 1,500 shots, which is actually more than the D700 used to. I think it used to be about 900. Memory card slot's only got one, which a lot of people gripe about, but I don't find a problem. Use a standard SD card. Do recommend get a good quality card, because it's not worth taking risks with your images, obviously, that you spend a lot of time taking. So shut the door up. Oh, apparently you can fit in here. I think you have to remove the battery, and you can fit in something, push it in there, and it has a lead, so you can use a external power supply. So that's a run over the main controls, etc. What can I tell you about the camera in use? For me personally, I find it excellent. A lot of people say I have many gripes with it, but I suppose it depends on what you expect from it and the way you want to use this type of camera. If you intend using this camera with G lenses, i.e. lenses without an aperture ring, and you always have the shutter dial set on 1/3 step, then to be honest with you, I think you're losing out on a lot of the advantages of this camera, basically, which is, to me, it's a compact camera compared to the other digital cameras. It's much smaller, it's less cumbersome to carry around. Fit a lens like this, it's very light, you can carry it around all day. It's not so intrusive on people when you're taking pictures of them, and you've got all the dials there. For me, one of the best handling Nikon film cameras of all time is the F3, and to use this with the apertures and the shutter speed, it's great, and I can now pick up the DF and basically use it the same. I always use it in manual mode. Very rarely I select aperture priority. Always use it in manual with auto ISO, so basically I can select shutter speed I want, and the way I do it is I usually want at least a minimum of a 60th of a second unless I've got a wide angle lens. If I've got a moving subject, I may go higher, 1/2 or 2/50 of a second, and then I think about what depth of field I want. So if I don't want to narrow depth of field, I select a narrow aperture, not usually wide open. Not with this lens because it's not very sharp wide open. And obviously you've got to think on what light. If you're indoors, you're going to want a wide aperture as well anyway. So I might select f2, 1/60 for indoors, set the auto ISO from 100 up to I set it to 6/400, which I find gives acceptable images at that speed, at that rating. And so I set the aperture shutter speed I want and let the camera set the ISO for me. But obviously you've got to think ahead. Obviously, I mean, if I move outdoors where it's bright sunshine, I've got to be thinking, yes, I've got to select at least a 2/50 of a second shutter speed probably, and a higher aperture, or a maximum aperture and a lower shutter speed if I need it. So you've got to think logically, of course, with the auto ISO, because obviously it does have a range it can't go beyond, so you may get overexposed shots outdoors, etc., if you set too lower aperture on the lens. So that's the way I use the camera, and I also use, like I say, the AF button for focusing. You've got an option in the menu for selecting AF activation off, which means on the shutter release, normally when you buy the camera, you press the shutter release half down and it will autofocus, and then you press it fully down, obviously it takes the picture. But I've set it up so the autofocus only works on the AF button, so when I press the AF button it focuses, as you can hear. And I also have it in continuous mode, because then I can control when I'm focusing, basically. So I'm pressing the AF on button and it keeps focusing for me until I let go of that, and then it won't change that focus, and then I can compose the shot and take it. So you've got full control on the focusing using that method. I say set in continuous mode, and I find it works great. The other thing I would change is, as by default in the viewfinder you see the number of frames as you do on the top of the display, but you can change that again in the menu for selecting to see the ISO, because obviously if you've got ISO set as auto ISO, it's nice to see what it's selecting, because you might think, well, you know, I want a nice sharp clear image, I don't want a high ISO, so I'll keep an eye on that and maybe change my shutter or aperture accordingly. So that's the way I use it. The buttons, I leave the top one set up for the depth of field preview, which works great for me, don't find a problem with it. The bottom one I've set up for when I use AI lenses. Basically you can fit non-autofocus or lenses with non-CPU contacts, but they are AI lenses, and you can connect those and you can just set it up in the menu. I'll show you where that is. Set up menu, go to non-CPU lens data, you can set up a lens in there, and you give the lens a number and you set up all the parameters. And what I've done with this button is when I press that on the display, it shows me which lens I've got it set up for. So that's for my 50mm AIS f1.2 lens, and I can quickly change by moving this dial to select a different lens, a 28mm with a maximum aperture. That's the maximum aperture, f3.5, 35mm with that maximum aperture, f3.5, etc. So I can quickly change I'm going to change my lenses to a AI setup lens on that button very quickly, and I find that useful. I will show you how to set up a manual lens, because one little trick this can do, which no other digital SLR can do, it can use the pre-AI lenses. So if I remove the lens and say normally the lens will make contact with the camera to select exposure and stop down the lens via either the CPU contacts for lenses with CPU pins, or with AI lenses it uses this AI coupling prong, which you can see moves accordingly. So again, the lens can talk to the camera to select the exposure. But a little trick on this camera which you can do is you can flick up this prong, you just flick it up with your thumb, takes it out of the way, so you can then fit a pre-AI lens, which is what I've got fitted on this Nikon F3. So just remove that. And a pre-AI lens basically has a flat mount. A standard AI lens has an indent that couples with that pin, but because this hasn't got that, you need to retract the pin to actually fit the lens, or you'll damage the pin. So you just fit the lens as normal. Now there's a problem with it contacting, sending information to the camera with this lens fitted, because obviously there's no way by changing the aperture on the lens it can register on the camera. So what you have to do is, first of all, you go into the menu, non-CPU lens data, and we need to set up a new lens. So I'll go to a new one that I've not been selected yet, which is number 6. Focal length, this is a 50mm f1.4 pre-AI lens, so I select at 50. Maximum aperture, which as I say is f1.4, and here you have on the option at the bottom an exposure meter coupling option, and it's normally set for AI, but you can change that to non-AI lens, and then when you've done, select done on there, and that's set up that lens. So now if I press my button I can see it's set up 51.4, just set up for this lens. Now the other thing though you need to do, because it's a pre-AI lens, like I say, it can't send the information to the camera exposure system. So with this lens what you have to do is you set the aperture you want, let's say f2.8, and then you have to manually change the aperture on the front command dial to 2.8 as well, and that couples the exposure together, so then you could change shutter speed to what you want and take your shot. I say it's only with these pre-AI lenses you have to go that roundabout way, so every time you change the aperture you have to then change it again on the command dial. With, say, normally with AI lenses you don't have that problem. So that's how it works with that. Put the FD lens back on. So I'm not going through with all the different menu options, etc. What other things can I tell you about this camera? Is it for you? It's difficult to say. Obviously it's a quirky camera as such, it's not for everybody, but if you like using old film cameras then I would say definitely it is. Oh, that's just something I nearly forgot to mention. You've got a drive mode selector around the shutter speed dial, and you've got normally single, which I always leave it at, and just give me a moment. No. Sorry about that, the dog just decided to destroy something coming through the post. Where was I? Where was I? Where was I? I can't remember what I was telling you about. Oh yes, the drive mode. I normally leave it on S for single. You've got continuous low, high. You've got a quiet mode, which is actually quiet. And you've got a self timer, and you've got a mirror up. And one comment I've got about the controls is I think the exposure mode should have been put around this dial, so you just have the 4 settings and then have those settings around this dial instead, which I don't use so often because this is the most fiddly dial on the camera. You just have to pull it up, and it's not a great thing to use, but so I don't find much problem because I generally use it in manual anyway. And it just seems a bit silly that they've done it like that, because you've got a 4 round circle dial with only 4 settings on it, which is obviously seems to me a bit daft, but there you go, that's Nikon for you. Maybe they'll get it right with the DF2, but having said that, I don't think they will bring out a DF2. So right, is the camera for you? It is for me, definitely. So I got rid of the D700. I found this handle's a lot better. I can use my film camera, come straight to this and use it the same. So I always use it, unless I use a G lens, I always use it with the aperture setting on the lens. And that's the way I like to work. So if you like using the old manual controls, you want a compact body, then this camera will be ideal for you. If you don't, if you're after a good quality digital camera, I would say probably go for the D750, which has video option for a start. And let's not go into that subject, but to be honest, if you after film a camera for taking photos, you don't need video, but that's my thought anyway. Yes, go for a D750, which is cheaper than this. Looking at prices at the moment, I just went on Amazon, and one of these would set you back, say, 1700. A D750 will cost you 1500, so slightly cheaper. What would you lose out on the D750? I think this will be better slightly in higher ISOs, because it's got the same sensor and processor, X-speed processor, as the Nikon D4. And that's where it really scores in low light. So that's the advantage of this, and I say as well as the controls. But I say it's a difficult choice to make. The only way you're going to get a better sense than this, though, on a Nikon digital camera is if you go for the D4. But obviously that's now the D4S, which sells for about £4,000. So if you need that, well, that's obviously a hell of a lot bigger as well. I forgot to set me aperture ring back. Anyway, let's look at the Nikon DF, and thanks for watching.